So, I just got back from Germany. So I went to Germany because I've been interested in moving there for a while, and I also haven't had any sort of real vacation in about 2 years because of we all know why. And so I went over for a week in late November. I've been learning German for about 2 years now, and one thing that I've never had, or one opportunity that I've never had in all this time, is to actually speak German to a person from Germany. I've read books in German, I've watched movies, I've listened to podcasts, I've tried writing things, I've done videos in German, but I've never actually sat down and spoken to someone in German. And I finally got the chance to do that. And it's an interesting experience because there's definitely a divide, and you can definitely see the importance of practice. Because the first time I sat down and actually had a back and forth conversation with someone, I very quickly learned that I was a bit out of my depth. I could understand what he was saying, and I could formulate responses, but I had to think about every single word as I said it. There was no automaticness. There was no instant response. And it was funny, after a while he just went, "Your German sounds very foreign." And I had to agree. I was not having the native sound that I thought that I was going to have. And I think we have a tendency to overestimate our abilities, even if in practice we say we're not going to be good. Like, I would say, oh yeah, I've never actually had a conversation, I know that I have to get better and all that. But then in my head I'd be like, yeah, but I'm going to kill it. I'm going to know exactly what I'm doing. And then as soon as I have to say an actual sentence, I'm like, ja, ich verstehe jede Wörter, aber... And it was a little painful, and so there came a point where I was like, I think I'll work on my German later. If you can speak to me in English, or if I can respond to you in English, that'll be fine. But otherwise, what's funny about Berlin is that just about everyone in Berlin speaks English. It was very rare to encounter someone who didn't actually speak any English. And in a way, this almost becomes more difficult when you're trying to practice German, because as soon as I spoke German to people, they would just switch to English. They'd listen to about 3 words from me and be like, this guy does not sound German, he sounds very foreign. And so they'd immediately start replying back to me in English, and it's like, no, I'm trying to practice. But it was good to have the trip because it finally felt like I was getting an immersive experience. It's always hard living in the UK where you're trying to learn a language that nobody around you speaks, and so you have to force yourself to input everything. And so it was interesting being in a country of the language I'm trying to learn, and just everything is in that language. I turn on the TV in the hotel and everything is in German. And fortunately the hotel TV came with captioning, and so you can learn better to match the sounds you hear to the actual words. And that's important because in German TV, of course, they're speaking at a natural pace. They're speaking very quickly, and they're also speaking in a lot more dialect. Which actually, that was another interesting thing that I was trying to experience when I came to Germany, was being in Berlin. I know that they have the famous Berliner dialect, and I wanted to see if people actually spoke that. But what I learned very interestingly being in Berlin is that the majority of people there are not actually from Berlin. The statistics I got from some people who had moved there was that Berlin is roughly 66% native Germans, but only 33 or so percent of people in Berlin were actually born in Berlin. And I had the opportunity to meet 2 different people from Berlin. One person was from somewhere in the east, he didn't say his exact neighborhood, and another person was born and raised in Spandau, which is about as far west as you can get and still be in Berlin. But he had also spent some time in Charlottenburg, which is closer to like the Brandenburg Gate, Tiergarten, that area. And I was talking to him and asking, well, do you speak dialect? And he said no. Basically, even though he was aware of it and he had grown up around some people that spoke it, his parents were not from Berlin, and so he hadn't grown up like that. He hadn't grown up speaking dialect. and so he just spoke standard German. And it was just interesting to see that even among a lot of the native Berliners, the dialect is being somewhat pushed down. And I know that I've seen this from people like Lang Focus talking about this, and I've also spoken about this in one of my earlier videos. But there's a process called dialect leveling, where various dialects of a language are gradually reduced and flattened so that what makes them different to the standard version of the language is taken away. And that's usually because of the internet or because of cities where you're kind of forced to speak in a certain way. You grow up speaking in a certain way. You don't have people who are in Berlin who have been there for generations speaking the dialect. Most of the people in Berlin are not from the area, so they're not going to be speaking in that dialect, and they don't pass it down to their children, and so gradually the dialect is forgotten. Of course, I tried to also do a bit of shopping while I was in Berlin. Just before I got to the city, I had finished reading Marco V. Kling's Qualityland, which I will say is a big improvement over the Kangaroo Chronicles. I didn't think the Kangaroo Chronicles series was very good, but I thought Qualityland was pretty good. And so I did manage to pick up Qualityland 2.0, which is the sequel, and it's decent so far. It's nice to read things in German that were written by a German person, and where there's also a lot of casualness, and you get a much more of a sense of the actual spoken language. And it was interesting where various people were leading me around Berlin, and they would get into conversations, and I could understand everything that they were saying, these native Germans speaking to each other. And I could understand it all, or at least I could, at the very minimum, I could always get the gist of what they were saying, and in some cases I could understand every sentence, even as they spoke very quickly. And sometimes they would just turn to me looking and be like, "Should we switch to English? Do you understand?" And I'm just like, "Don't worry, I can understand, but I know that I can't respond in anything but English, or we're gonna be here for years." I also got the chance to meet up with someone who had recently moved to Berlin from Passau. And Passau is in the far south of Germany. It's near the Austrian border. And that is in Bavaria. And so I was asking this person, well, do you speak Bavarian? Do you speak standard German? And so obviously he could speak standard German pretty well, because that's kind of the taught language in Bavaria. Germany has this thing where there are regional dialects in various areas, but in languages of schools, they're always taught in standard German. And also Bavarian is not really a written language, it's mostly a spoken language, so it's kind of confined to that colloquial nature. But he did speak some Bavarian, he was raised in that area, and Passau is also kind of small town, so it's not as under as much effect of the dialect leveling you would see in cities or from the internet. He told me of this very good, what he called the Bavarian Test, which is how do you know if someone is Bavarian or if they could survive in Bavaria? And it's how do you translate squirrel tail? Because in standard German it's Einhornchenschweif, but in Bavarian it's, give me a second, I wrote this down and I asked him, apologies if I say this horribly, Ochkatzelschwof. I have no idea if that's how you say it. He had said it briefly, but he said it, very quickly. And thankfully he wrote it down for me. But you can see that it's reminiscent of the German, especially the Schweif, Schwof. But at the same time, it seems completely different, and if someone just hit you with that out of nowhere, you'd have no idea what you were listening to, and you'd be very lost. And so it was interesting just to see that and to learn about the different methods of speaking German. But yeah, so that was my experience in Berlin, doing as the Berliners do, and finally getting a chance to truly try and use German as a working language. And fortunately, if you're ever going to Germany, all you need to know is Genau, Dankeschön, Bitte. And you can do basically whatever you need to do, not knowing any other German. So the idea of this video and what I want to start is kind of a semi-regular, maybe monthly series of language vlogs, where I can just talk to you casually about languages. and about learning, and about what I've seen recently, what I've seen from German, Japanese, anything else. And I want to see what you think in the comments. Have you been learning German? Have you had the chance to go to Germany recently? Have you been able to use it? Or do you want to be able to use it but you haven't had the chance yet? Have you had the experience where you've been learning languages self-taught or from a book for a while, and then you've finally gone to the country where they're spoken and you've realized that you're a little bit out of your depth? Tell me that and all in the comments. And of course, like, subscribe, ring the bell. Happy Weihnachten.